Cutscenes are non-interactive video sequences in games. Dating all the way from 90s-80s Pac-Man, where the game's premiere cutscene established the game's premise, explaining how Pac-Man runs away from the ghosts, but then once he gets the power pellet he can chase them down. Since then, they've become a given in any game, and they're often storytellers' main tool to convey strong emotions tied to story beats, character development, and in general make the player care about the story. To an extent, they're also heavily criticized, interrupting the interactivity of gameplay for a passive storytelling medium. Any player, any developer who might forget or dismiss adding the ability to skip cutscenes in a game is heavily scrutinized. Of course, it's not all black and white, but where I stand on the spectrum, I've always absolutely enjoyed cutscenes in games. As a kid, I remember that if you let the title screen of many games idle for a few minutes, the game's intro cutscene would start playing again, and I would sit down and rewatch the game intros of my favorite games over and over and over, as kids do. A game from my childhood I also vividly remember is Super Paper Mario, a game that features one of the most complex plots and some of the highest amount of dialogue I've ever experienced in any game. At the end of each chapter, you get to see what the cast of villains is up to in Count Black's lair, as they discuss their plans, interact with each other, and as a player you start to sympathize with them. In other words, their characters are developed through these cutscenes in the story. The game would simply not be the same without them. Nowadays, cutscenes are pictured as these 3D or in some cases 2D anime style, pre-rendered high quality, almost movie-like animation sequences. Most people wouldn't call Pac-Man's cutscene a cutscene anymore, even though it was the first cutscene in video game history. They just refer to it as a small cute little animation. Or Paper Mario's cutscenes at the end of each chapter. It's just dialogue. That's not a cutscene. It's not like a video, it's just dialogue. This is wrong. Like, I'd say even more wrong than if someone told me that a chicken was not a bird because it couldn't fly. Passive story sequences that offer minimal interactivity to the player are still cutscenes even if they occur inside of the game. They may not often be as flashy, they're often synonymous with cheap reused assets and animations, which is why Pokemon employs so many of them. But in the right hands, they're a very useful tool for developers to elaborate plot threads while saving resources for the big story beats, or just generally convey more expression for games that can't offer those big pre-rendered luxury cutscenes. It wasn't until Final Fantasy VII came out to renowned success in 1997 that pre-rendered cutscenes became a real thing in video games. This game was revolutionary for its more than half an hour of pre-rendered graphic sequences for the best equipment Silicon Valley could produce. It's the reason it couldn't fit in a Nintendo 64 cartridge. Anyways, history lessons over. Thornetica as a pixel art retro RPG won't feature 3D pre-rendered cutscenes, but it has and will continue to utilize more in-game cutscenes. Probably since I played Super Paper Mario, I've been captivated by this storytelling technique. Ever since I got into making games, I've been fascinated by 1. How to make a dialogue system, 2. How to make a cutscene system. Because once you have both, the possibilities to tell stories are endless. You can tell to the player whatever you want. Obviously, as I said, some people may see this as cheap, but it's much more reasonable for a single guy making a game to employ this type of cutscene system rather than draw all of the manga panels in a manga or draw every frame of animation. So, how did Thornetica's animation system come to be? Well, it sort of almost materialized out of nowhere by accident. I didn't really ever make it a priority. So as much as I wanted to, I was always focused on the next important game-breaking bug or main mechanic that we were missing in the game. There came a point where I was convinced that we needed a tutorial to actually show the game to the public, because a lot of people have never played this type of game before. And this entailed a system to both force players and AI entities to take specific actions. You can see this in chapter 1 with the tutorial. The AI engineers will always plant a mine in this tile and will retreat to this tile even though the AI engineer usually only has a 60% chance to decide to plant a mine. I remember when I pulled this off, I thought to myself, this is almost already a cutscene system already. I'm instructed entities in the game to take specific actions. The only caveat through which it doesn't qualify as a cutscene system is that it is still currently game bound. It's still bound by the rules of the games. So the engineer acts on the ally turn, it takes a predetermined action and it finishes its turn, and then it's someone else's turn. It cannot deal more damage than its weapon says, it cannot move further than its entity movement says, or take actions outside its turn whatsoever. This is good because I don't want the tutorial to follow other rules that are not the game rules, if that would be kind of stupid as a tutorial. It should be easy in theory, but creating a wildcard to bypass all the systems is actually a bit of a nightmare code-wise, or at least it's very risky. You want these systems to be as secure as possible. If code exists in the game that could make the units deal more damage than they are supposed to, or bypass the rules of movement, move through obstacles, take actions outside of their turn, then if this is done hastily, you could start seeing a plethora of bugs of entities dealing more damage than they're supposed to, entities moving outside of their turn, etc, etc. So at this point, which was some weeks before Thornetica's first official showing, I decided that this wasn't a priority. I laid to rest the idea and focused on further bug polishing and more content that we were missing, etc, etc. This was until just a few weeks before the release of the demo. I was going through the dialogue scripts over and over, revising stuff, doing test runs of the game, etc. The story felt somewhat monochrome, as you would get told the story, but you would just see the units you would control there idling as they talk, but there was no really anything happening. And I thought, wow, it would be so cool to just have them move around, attack this guy, then move here, then the camera follows. And I realized, wait, I have all of the systems that I need in place. I have systems for the entities to move, I have systems to play the animations, I have systems for the camera to move. We just have to make it into an elegant way that ignores the rules of the game without possibly affecting the playability in any kind of way. I created a code class known as the Puppet Director and gave all entities an additional state machine with two states, game state and puppet state. Game state follows all of the rules of the game. Puppet state says, screw the rules, I can use the systems to do whatever the hell you tell me to do, basically. Using the game's existing pathfinding system, you can move characters in cutscenes. You can call the entity to abide collision logic or not abide collision logic. For instance, in Act 1, when the fighting finishes, the entities, the main characters basically, go to these exact positions. No matter where in the map they previously were, they will move following collision logic. They won't walk through trees or walls or whatever. In contrast, in Act 3, John Neville is meant to appear from behind these trees. He is actually hidden outside of the map, and when his turn in the play comes, he basically ghosts through the map, the trees, which is something you wouldn't be able to normally do in gameplay. This is all well and good, but as I was accomplishing this, I soon started to realize that there was actually many more side effects and scenarios that I hadn't accounted for. No later than in Act 1 of the game, where Jack Cade and James Kent are the enemies of the act, and they have to appear defeated in the epilogue cutscene of the game. But the way the game was working up until this point was, whenever you kill a unit, it gets completely deleted, wiped from the existence of the game. So how can a unit that no longer exists in the data of the game appear in a cutscene? I could spawn it again, or spawn some sort of fake version of it to be used for the cutscene, but that would actually imply more work than I thought was worth, because I'd have to copy the attributes from the dead. I had to save the attributes of the dead unit someplace, and then if that unit was to be used again for the cutscene, I would have to copy the attributes from them, and it was just kind of a mess. The solution I opted for was way simpler. Basically, when a unit dies, it is sort of put in this hidden puppet state, and if the unit is meant to be used up in the cutscene of the epilogue, it sort of appears again, basically. This can also be seen in Act 2, where Queen Margaret appears in the prologue, but had to be hidden away before the gameplay starts. While I did this, I also went ahead and made a system to save the position of all entities. So basically, when the level designer places the entities in the map, those entities may move in the cutscene, but there is a save file of sorts that saves the position the entities should be for the level. So once the cutscene finishes, they snap back to those positions. For anyone curious to actually dictate the actions of the cutscenes, I use the exact same dialogue system as I use for the dialogue. I use Nathan Hode's Dialogue Manager. Since it allows you to directly call autoloads from it, I can just say, camera, move here, Puppet Master, move the Duke of York to this tile, play this animation, etc, etc. Right now I'm working on an extension of this cutscene system to bring those quirky animations and characters moving from one place to another to the backstage. The main difference being here I had to actually make a new pathfinding system because there is no pathfinding in the regular backstage, and I can't use the tile-based pathfinding from the front stage. Luckily, it was actually way easier. I just kind of used Godot's default sheet and it was extremely simple. Much simpler than whatever the fuck is going on with the pathfinding code from the front stage, I would say. And yeah, stay tuned for more updates on that. That's all for this week's video. Let me know what other topics about game development or in relation to Thornetica's development you'd like me to talk about, and that is all. See you. Lazy Game Dev out.